Welcome to a lecture series on the 7 Sermons to the Dead, or Septem Sermones et Mortis by Carl Jung. The good news about presenting this information at this time is that the red and black books in which the sermons originated in are available. You see, Jung originally released the 7 sermons without any attribute to his name. He released a limited number of copies under a pseudonym, as the subtitle to the 7 Sermons to the Dead reads, The 7 Instructions of the Dead, written by Basilides in Alexandria, where the East touches the West, translated from the original Greek text into the German language. As one may know, or will come to see, there are many Gnostic ties to this text. For example, the structuring of the sermons, as written in the footnotes, is presented in the form analogous to a Gnostic myth. While we will be exploring and highlighting the Gnostic symbols, as well as this general structure, the aim for the series will be built upon a note found in the footnotes, which reads, There has been an extensive body of commentaries concerning the Septem Sermones, which provides some valuable discussion. However, these should be treated cautiously, as they considered sermones without the benefit of Liber Novus and the Black Books, and not least Philemon's commentaries, which together provides critical contextual clarification. My focus, with the addition of the raw Black Books and Philemon's commentaries in the Red Book, is to provide an original, updated commentary on this material. In addition, to complete this brief introduction, I want to mention I will be tracing back this material beyond Gnosticism to ancient Greek philosophy, specifically figures such as Parmenides, Socrates, and Plato, to help bring Jung's metaphysical cosmology to its true Western roots. As you will come to see, many direct connections will be found in Plato's Parmenides, and as I continue to dig into Jung's inner guru or teacher, Philemon, I'm beginning to think he just may be of that same logos that the ancient Greeks were in touch with, say before Aristotle distorted its true essence. Throughout the series, you will not only gain a new appreciation for Jung's work, as well as a new perspective to his psychology, you'll also gain a new insight into life and reality. This is said to be Jung's summary revelation from his Red Book experience. And what is rather interesting to note, again found in the footnotes, it reads, Jung said to Anelia Jaffe that the discussions with the dead formed the prelude to what he would subsequently communicate to the world, and that their content anticipated his later books. So this material is truly a summary of all in which he wished to provide the world. And throughout this series, we will touch upon many topics found in Jungian psychology, as well as dig into his red and black books, Gnosticism, and Ancient Greek philosophy. And with this brief introduction, it is time to begin the first sermon. Sermon 1, January 30th, 1916. Sermon 1 begins, and the author to the sermons has shifted 3 times since 1916. Before the release of the Red Book, it was Basilides of Alexandria. Then before the release of the Black Books, it was Philemon. And now, at the original source, we've come to find out it is Jung. Well, not Jung's ego, but rather within his logos. What is so beautiful is the fact that he seemed to produce this material under a stream of consciousness. There is no specific plan to it. It just happened. He didn't seem to think about this material, as it is found in the Black Books just like any other entry. Jung didn't specifically say, this will be the 7 Sermons to the Dead. Rather, again, it just happened within him. And you can understand why there was a mix-up in authorship, as it is rather tough to claim material provided outside one's own will and knowledge. And just as any black book entry begins, we'll begin with Jung as he's in discussion or dialect with his soul. Jung says, "What's up with these spirits? They're tearing at me and I have difficulty standing. The dead, surrender." Jung, "So speak, you dead. Aren't you empty yet?" The dead, "We have come back from Jerusalem, where we did not find what we sought. We implore you to let us in. You have what we desire. Not your blood, but your light. That is it." Jung, "But what can I do?" The dead, "Teach us. We'll listen." Jung, "What should I teach?" The dead, "The wisdom, the knowledge that you have gained and we lack." Jung, "But where shall I begin?" The dead, Begin wherever you think it is good to start." Jung, "Now listen, you dead. I teach you." This begins Sermon 1. I begin with nothingness. Nothingness is the same as fullness. In infinity, full is as good as empty. Nothingness is empty and full. You might as well say anything else about nothingness. For instance, that it is white or black, or that it does not exist, or that it exists. Again, it is not, or it is. That which is endless and eternal has no qualities, since it has all qualities. Jung begins with nothingness. What is important to note is the ness, which follows nothing. Ness represents a state, condition, or quality. And this word quality will be found throughout the sermon. But what's important to note at the root of this ness is nothing. If I were to describe the infinity Jung is beginning with, using any such quality, condition, or state, then it will be outside all the qualities it is or it is not. If I say it's hot, what about cold? If I say it's beautiful, what about ugly? It is impossible then to describe. As Jung says, you may as well say anything else about nothingness. And with this paradox of a beginning, if you haven't already caught on with all this talk of quality and nessness, I want to bring in Plato's Parmenides, our ancient Greek text for reference in this and future sermons. There are many discussions regarding this idea that Jung begins with, which Parmenides calls the One. So we find Aristotle and Parmenides in a discussion of this all-in-one, in which Parmenides uses a term that many who know Jung are familiar with, as an image to use as an analogy to refer to the One. And this term is the Self. Parmenides states, "Accordingly then, there is neither name, nor logos, nor any knowledge, nor perception, nor opinion that could be attributed to self." Aristotle, "It has not come to light." Parmenides, "Accordingly then, neither can it be named, nor be spoken of, nor be opined of, nor be the object of knowledge, nor do the real beings have a perception of self." Aristotle, "It is not likely." Parmenides, "Therefore, is it possible that these conclusions have to be in this way about the One?" You see, if we take into account Jung's nothingness, we see how this is one, of which cannot be spoken, named, or opinionated about. If you say it is good, well then you forget it's evil. If you say it's beyond good and evil, then you're getting closer to its essence without truly saying anything about it. If anyone's familiar with the quote, again out of ancient Greek philosophy, "All is one," this is the idea that Jung begins the sermons with. In addition, I use this quote to bring forth the self found in a rather new Greek translation. In the description below, I have linked this translation to Plato's Parmenides. And you see, it is Parmenides who is using the self as an analogy to the one in his dialogue. And this is extremely important to note, as almost all of Jung's psychology is built upon this principle. As we know, the imago Dei, or image of God, to Jung is the self. Hence, according to Jung, if you know the self, you know God. The same thinking is used by Parmenides here, again as he's referring to its image, the image of the self, to attempt to speak about the one, say the one self, which theologically, and will later find Philemon refer to as God. Jung continues the sermon with another name for this space. We call this nothingness or fullness the pleroma. Therein both thinking and being cease, since the eternal and endless possess no qualities. No one is in it, for he would then be distinct from the pleroma, and would possess qualities that would distinguish him as something distinct from the pleroma. In the pleroma, there is nothing and everything. It is fruitless to think about the pleroma, for this would mean self-dissolution. Before touching upon this name, pleroma, I want to highlight the fact that in it, thinking and being cease. This separates the pleroma or one from being, meaning it's in a separate or different realm, dimension, or place. Now, another name given to this realm is eternity. In psychological terms, Jung coins the pleroma the collective unconscious. It is truly outside space and time. Now, on this pleroma, a footnote adds, in 1929, Jung said the Gnostics expressed it as pleroma, a state of fullness where the pairs of opposites, yea and nay, day and night, are together. Then when they become, it is either day or night. In the state of promise, before they become, they are non-existent. There is neither white nor black, good nor bad. So we see in the pleroma the opposites are bound together and have no specific quality, whereas when they become, the quality becomes effective. In this, we see becoming or quality coming out of the pleroma and creating a second realm. And now Jung continues on this second realm of becoming. Creature is not in the pleroma, but in itself. The pleroma is the beginning and end of the creature. It covers it all over, so to speak. It pervades it, just like the sunlight pervades the air. Although the pleroma pervades us, we are not in it, just as a wholly transparent body becomes neither light nor dark through the light pervading it. But we are the pleroma, for we are enclosed in and a part of the eternal and the endless. But we have no share therein, as we are infinitely removed from pleroma, not spatially or temporally, but essentially, since we are distinguished from the pleroma in our essence as creation, which is confined within space and time. Here I will begin to build a diagram that we will continue to refer and add to. I'll begin with this higher realm beyond space and time. The pleroma, or one, is a space where there's no quality, there's no being, there's no thinking. And out of this space, out of this pleroma, becomes creature. This act of creation, which then becomes the essence of the creature, removes creature essentially from the pleroma, or the one. This realm of creation, then, is where quality, being, and thinking take place. This explains creature not in the pleroma, but what about his notion that we are the pleroma? Jung adds, yet because we are parts of the pleroma is also in us. Even in the smallest point, the pleroma is endless and eternal, since small and great are qualities that are contained in it, Only figuratively, therefore, do I speak of created beings as part of the pleroma, because the pleroma is everywhere, endless, and eternal. We are also the pleroma itself. Hence I say that we are not in the pleroma, but we are it. Figuratively, the pleroma is the smallest point in us and the boundless firmament about us. To add to our image, we are parts of the pleroma. As Jung says, it is also in us. If you take a part of a one, the one remains unaffected, and another one is created, say creature, as an image of the one. Now on this, I want to bring in, yet again, Plato's Parmenides, but this time a commentary by Proclus. He wrote, "For on one hand, reality being must be both one and many, and since every monad has a plurality that corresponds to it, and every plurality is comprehended under a certain appropriate monad. But on the other hand, since in every case the underlying cause of plurality is itself bound together to the monad, and plurality is unable to be without it." So out of a creative one comes the plurality and its opposites. And if you add one plus these two opposites, you get three, a triangle. You see how everything is bound to this one. And from the one comes creation. Hence the base of the triangle represents the extremes of qualities, and the monad has the same idea as an archetype. You see how this top archetype, this top form, this top idea, then has its separate qualities. And this one is not the one, or pleroma, but rather an image of it. Now this may be tricky to grasp, but this may help. From the pleroma, or one becomes an image of an undifferentiated archetype, say the self. And from the self become all its qualities. Now, another archetype you could use is the Great Mother. All undifferentiated ones, in a sense, monads, are images of their highest term. If there's a reality of the self or Great Mother in all of us, then there must be a true self, a true Great Mother, which would be, in Platonic terms, the model of which copies or images become in the world of forms, or in the world of creation. Again, where are all the archetypes found? In their own active and intelligent state, according to Jung, the collective unconscious. I will continue with the sermons, and at this point the dead ask Jung, "But why do you speak of the pleroma at all, since it is thus everything and nothing?" Jung responds and continues the sermon, "I speak of it to make a beginning somewhere, and also to free you from the delusion that somewhere without or within there is something fixed or in some way certain. Every so-called fixed and certain thing is only relative. That alone is fixed and certain, which is subject to change. Creation, however, is subject to change. Therefore, it alone is fixed and determined because it has qualities. Indeed, it is quality itself." Again, Jung is separating these two realms, the one of eternity and the other creation. And here he is explaining the reasoning for this idea of pleroma. In the pleroma, there is nothing fixed or certain. And this is a knock on any theological attempt to try to define God. He attributes anything fixed or certain as relative, and in the world of creation or becoming. Referring back to the monad in plurality, you can see how one created from the one, any archetype or say self, is subject to change throughout its qualities. While we enjoy our fixed comforts, say how we think we should be or how we think an archetype should show up. It is change and transformation that continues in that space of one because of its various qualities. And one more last thing to add before we continue is if creation is quality itself, and quality is two polar opposites, then you see why wholeness is an important aim in life. Because without wholeness, you truly cannot be. Now, at this point, the dead interject with another question, and it's rather curious. They ask, how did the creation come into being? Jung, creatures came into being, but not the creation, since it is the very quality of the pleroma, as much as non-creation, eternal death. The creation is ever present, and so is death. The pleroma has everything, differentiation and non-differentiation. Now, while the dead were curious of how creation came into being, Jung says it's rather the creature which comes into being, and not creation, because creation, as well as death, are ever present and eternal, whereas beings come to be and pass. And with this idea of creation coming out of the pleroma, you could see how this is the one source of all, how everything emanates out of it, goes back into it. In addition, two important words are introduced, those being differentiation and non-differentiation. As we've just discussed, differentiation refers to qualities of an archetype or a one, whereas non-differentiation refers to a one or an archetype, say the monad. While a non-differentiated state has all qualities, differentiation separates the qualities by their extremes. So we have an idea such as temperature. This would be the non-differentiated state, and it has both hot and cold as its opposing qualities, with every flavor in between, representing its differentiations. Jung continues on differentiation in the sermons. Differentiation is the creature. It is differentiated. Differentiation is its essence, and therefore it differentiates. Therefore man also differentiates, since his essence is differentiation. Therefore he also differentiates the qualities of the pleroma that do not exist, but he differentiates them on account of his own essence. Therefore, he must speak of those qualities of the pleroma that do not exist. Again, essence here is brought up. Jung says the essence of creature, that's us, is differentiation. Additionally, earlier, he said creation was our essence. So you see, creation and differentiation are of the same essence. The important point to touch upon about this differentiation is it's not done out of one's ego's opinions, but rather through its essence. This does not mean the ego is not part of the process, as it is developing awareness or consciousness through the experience. And it must be able to bear all opposites, all qualities, wholeness, without getting attached to allow the work to be. Now, at this point, the dead ask, what use is there speaking about it at all? Did you yourself not say that it is not worth thinking about the pleroma? Jung, I mention that to free you from the delusion that we are able to think about the pleroma. When we distinguish the qualities of the pleroma, we are speaking from the ground of our own differentiated state and about our own differentiation, but have effectively said nothing about the pleroma. Yet we need to speak about our own differentiation so that we may sufficiently differentiate ourselves. Our very nature is differentiation. If we are not true to this nature, we do not differentiate ourselves enough. We must therefore make distinctions between qualities. Here, while Jung and I have spoken about this pleroma, this one or collective unconscious, there has been nothing specific said about it. Again, only differentiation occurs in time and space through creation. At this, Jung says we are unable to think about it. What we can do, though, according to Jung, is make distinctions between qualities, or differentiate. Through this, one's consciousness becomes more aware of the parts of the one and its qualities. And what is rather interesting to note is Jung's future work after these sermons was looking into the archetypes and differentiating their qualities. So he truly left a masterwork for anyone willing to do the work. And you really have to ask yourself, how could you know a thing, say an archetype or your very own self, without understanding its qualities? You could read about it, but you got to experience it. Now, this process of differentiation is another directly linked to the dialect in Plato's Parmenides. This is exactly what Parmenides was teaching a young Socrates. I'll add a few quotes to see if you can catch this idea of differentiation. Parmenides says, "O Socrates, if anyone indeed does not permit the ideas of real beings to be, by not keeping their mind fixed upon all those recent objections and others like them, and does not define one of each particular certain idea, surely then they will have nowhere to turn their understanding, while they do not allow that the idea of each one of the real beings is always of the self, and in this way entirely destroy the power of dialectics." Socrates, you speak the truth. Parmenides, in what way wilt thou turn thine mind, if you are ignorant of these particular certain ideas? Socrates, at the present time, I do indeed appear not to see in what way at all. Parmenides, for prior to exercising thyself, O Socrates, thou shalt endeavor beforehand to define what is beautiful and just and good in each one of the ideas. Therefore, on the one hand, the impulse by which thou art compelled towards the Logos is beautiful and divine. Thou may be sure of that. Whereas, on the other hand, thou must also collect thyself together by exercising more in that way that appears to be useless to the multitude, and is called by them empty talk. For if thou does not while thou is still young, the truth will utterly elude thee. This highlights and expands on Jung's words. You see, the key word here is understanding. To gain that understanding, one must distinguish qualities of real beings. Real beings will correlate to Jung's archetypes, as we know the ultimate archetype of self. In Platonic thought, ideas such as beautiful and good are such archetypes. Again, Parmenides says before grasping particular ideas, before grasping the archetype, one must define it. And this is what he means by collecting oneself, as you must collect all the qualities to grasp it. And this is exactly where Jung's pointing us. It is a delusion to think about the pleroma or collective unconscious. But what we can do is understand qualities by differentiation. Another point to add is Parmenides says that the ideas of each one of the real beings, the ideas of the archetype, is always of the self, which connects perfectly to Jung's psychology, as he calls the self the ultimate archetype. And if one does not allow it to be, it would destroy the power of dialectics. And this plays right into what Jung was speaking on about differentiating out of its own nature. Again, it's not the ego that differentiates based off its opinions, but one could say it's the self. Now, these connections are rather frightening between the Greeks and Jung. And speaking of, Parmenides spoke about the power of dialectics. This was the way of understanding or gaining awareness and knowledge in Greek philosophy. And I believe Jung was performing his own inner dialect with his images and Red Book experience to gain higher levels of awareness. It's another rather interesting note to ponder. But we must go back to the sermons, as yet again the dead interject. Why? What harm is there in not differentiating oneself? Jung. If we do not differentiate, we move beyond our own essence, beyond creation, and we fall into non-differentiation, which is the other quality of the pleroma. We fall into the pleroma itself and cease to be created beings. We lapse into eternity and endlessness. This is the death of creature. Therefore, we die to the same extent that we do not differentiate. Hence, the creature's essence strives towards differentiation. This is called the principium individuationis. This principle is the essence of the creature. From this, you can see why non-differentiation and non-distinction pose a great danger to the creature. This is a powerful, powerful reflection on differentiation and the risks of not differentiating oneself. When one does not follow their own essence, their soul, their being, then they cease to be created beings. On the other hand, if one does strive for their own essence, then they begin the principium individuationis, or the individuation process. Here one can see it all come to light as one, embracing the wholeness of qualities, is becoming a one, hence individuated. Before one could truly know anything about the above, one must first embrace the below. The aim of individuation is to become a one, but before one can be one, the qualities must be experienced and understood. You see, Jung is keeping us grounded and focused on our essence, so that we may come to understand and know of the truth of self. And this is exactly what Parmenides was teaching young Socrates. On differentiation, Jung continues, we must therefore distinguish the qualities of the pleroma. These elementary qualities are pairs of opposites. The most important pair of opposites are the effective and the ineffective, the fullness and the emptiness, the living and the dead, the different and the same, light and darkness, hot and cold, force and matter, time and space, good and evil, the beautiful and the ugly, the one and the many. Our quality is differentiation, but as we are the pleroma itself, we also have all qualities in us. Since our nature is grounded in differentiation, we have all these qualities in the name and under the sign of differentiation. When we strive for the good or the beautiful, we forget our essence, which is differentiation, and we fall subject to the spell of the qualities of the pleroma, which are the pairs of opposites. We endeavor to attain the good and the beautiful, yet at the same time we also seize the evil and the ugly. Since in the pleroma, these are one with the good and the beautiful. But if we do the same in the name and under the sight of our essence, which is differentiation, we differentiate ourselves from the good and the beautiful, and hence from the evil and ugly. And thus we do not fall under the spell of the pleroma. Jung first laid out essential qualities of the pleroma, and with these you'll see how each has a rather active and passive part of it, laying the foundation of various monads, or archetypes. As one grasps these opposites, they may come to know it. After the opposites, Jung speaks of the spell of the pleroma, and this is so important to reflect on and contemplate. And you see how a huge part of his psychology, specifically shadows, come into play here. Because if we pick and choose sides, then we fall victim to an opposite. Hence, the persona builds a shadow. This is the spell of the pleroma. And the only way out is differentiating oneself from the qualities. The only way to break the spell is individuation. Jung continues, since our nature is grounded in differentiation, We have all these qualities in the name and under the sign of differentiation. To this, Jung then adds in the Red Book, which means, first, these qualities are differentiated and separate in us. Therefore, they do not cancel each other out, but are effective. Thus, we are the victims of the pairs of opposites. The pleroma is rent in us. Second, the qualities belong to the pleroma, and we possess and live them only in the name and under the sign of differentiation. We must differentiate ourselves from these qualities. They cancel each other out in the pleroma, but not in us. Distinction from them saves us. Now, Jung provides 2 points about the qualities. First is a haunting note about the collective unconscious. Again, as it is in us, or as Jung says, is rent in us. The only other option, other than accepting this, is ignorance, in which one ceases to be. Secondly, to accept, one may differentiate their self from the qualities. I've saved this note for now, in case anyone may have came to it on their own, but this idea of differentiation or distinction is a process of detachment. The ego, detaching from the qualities while not avoiding them and experiencing them, is thus gaining conscious awareness and developing through the process without becoming fixated. After this, the dead ask, "You said that difference and sameness are also qualities of the pleroma. What is it like if we strive for distinctiveness in the name of differentiation? Are we, in doing so, not true to our own nature? And must we nonetheless fall into sameness when we strive for distinctiveness?" With this important final question from the dead, Jung concludes the sermon, "You must not forget that the pleroma has no qualities. We create these qualities through thinking. If therefore you strive for distinctiveness or sameness, you pursue your thoughts about the qualities of the pleroma, which do not exist. Inasmuch as you run after these thoughts, you fall again into the pleroma and attain distinctiveness and sameness at the same time. Not your thinking, but your essence is differentiation. Therefore, you must not strive for what you conceive as distinctiveness, but for your own essence. You should and can strive only for this without damage, and for everything else in the name and the sign of your essence. At bottom, therefore, there is only one striving, namely, the striving for the essence in you. If you had this striving, you would not need to know anything about the pleroma and its qualities, and yet you would attain the right goal by virtue of your own essence. Since, however, thought alienates us from our essence, I must teach you that knowledge with which you can bridle your thoughts. Finis Sermones, C.G. Jung. And here Jung ends the sermon with essence. And what's rather interesting to note is that this essence is intelligent. How else could it differentiate and attain the right goal without damage? He is keeping the ego in check. Thinking gets in the way, but the essence knows. Now, this word essence in Greek can be translated to ousia. And using this idea of ousia, I'm going to bring forth another quote in Plato's Parmenides. Parmenides says to Socrates, "Yet on one hand, as it fails to the ability of an individual of a very good natural disposition to be able to learn that there is a certain genius of each idea, and that of self-ousia, according to, in, and of self, so on the other hand, they will deserve even greater admiration, who, having made this discovery, shall be able to teach yet another person how to thoroughly well distinguish all the particulars in a sufficiently efficient way." This not only helps to keep the ego from distorting the work, but also highlights that idea of essence that Jung has been pointing to throughout this entire sermon, which is according to, in, and of self. Again, it is intelligent, and intelligence in all. And to bring it all together in modern terms, this is an idea of self-reflection or meditation, allowing essence to speak, to bring forth its qualities, and attain higher levels of understanding or consciousness through one's own self. And while Jung has pointed to the higher in this sermon, he's first getting us to understand and grasp our own essence, while brittling our thoughts. And as there's much I can add, and will add in the future, I want to conclude in the Red Book. Conclusion. Now, after this sermon concludes, a little more dialogue occurs between Jung and Philemon. Again, it is Philemon, say Jung's inner logos, which provides the sermons to the dead in the Red Book version. After the sermon, Jung writes in the Red Book, "But I turned to Philemon and said, 'My father, you utter strange teachings. Did not the ancients teach similar things? And was it not a reprehensible heresy, removed equally from love and the truth? And why do you lay out such a teaching to this horde, which the night wind swirled up from the dark blood fields of the west?' Philemon replies, 'My son, these dead ended their lives too early. These were seekers and therefore still hover over their graves. Their lives were incomplete, since they knew no way beyond the one to which belief had abandoned them. But since no one teaches them, I must do so. That is what love demands, since they wanted to hear, even if they grumble. But why do I impart this teaching of the ancients? I teach in this way because their Christian faith once discarded and prosecuted precisely this teaching, but they repudiated Christian belief and hence were rejected by that faith. They do not know this, and therefore I must teach them, so that their lives may be fulfilled and they can enter into death.' Philemon explains to Jung that the dead were led astray by their belief, and it was necessary to teach them another way so they may know and their lives become fulfilled. What is rather interesting to note is this idea of belief and knowing is an analogy to Plato's divided line. This time in Plato's Republic, Socrates outlines 4 different levels of consciousness or experiences in the soul or psyche. In Plato's Republic, Socrates says, there exist these 4 experiences, affections in the soul: intellection, answering to the highest section, then understanding to the second section, then assigning trusting to the third section, and image thinking to the last section. It is our ego, differentiating itself based off its essence, which allows higher levels of knowing to develop. The highest level is intellection or knowing. The section which is just below the divided line, below understanding, is trusting or belief. And this is exactly where the dead were left, and where Philemon is attempting to help bring them through the divided line towards understanding and knowing. Jung now asks Philemon, "But do you, O wise Philemon, believe what you teach?" Philemon responds, "My son, why do you raise this question? How can I teach what I believe? Who could give me the right to such a belief? It is what I know how to say, not because I believe it, but because I know it. If I knew better, I would teach better. But it would be easy for me to believe more. Yet, should I teach a belief to those who have discarded belief? And I ask you, is it good to believe something even more if one does not know better?" Jung curiously asks, "But are you certain that things really are as you say?" Philemon, "I do not know whether it is the best that one can know, but I know nothing better, and therefore I am certain these things are as I say. If they were otherwise, I would say something else, since I would know them to be otherwise. But these things are as I know them, since my knowledge is precisely these things themselves. First, we remember this BBC clip where Jung was asked in an interview if he believed in God.
Do you now believe in God?
Now? Difficult to answer. I know. I don't need to believe. I know.
You see, he mirrors his inner logos, Philemon. Now, the real gold in this exchange is found in the last sentence, where it reads, "These things are as I know them, since my knowledge is precisely these things themselves." This is powerful because this logos that Jung is in contact with seems to be the same logos that Parmenides speaks of in his few remaining fragments, in which I quote, "Thus keep your inquiring mind from that path. Do not let custom, by way of overwhelming daily habits, force your eye to be aimless and your ear and tongue to be echoes, but let your logos discern this much disputed question flowing out of myself." You see, before everything was distorted, original Greek philosophy was logic and reason through this idea of logos. The reason I have and will continue to connect back to the early Greeks is to bring forth this truth about the logos. You see, without the logos, without that trust of the essence that is intelligence, one will never be able to continue their work. But if one is open to this space, to this logos, and to this intelligence, they'll be open to form a relationship with it that will help them truly individuate. And what's so beautiful about the logos is whether it's Parmenides or Jung or even my own journey, this truth remains the same if one is meditating on and contemplating its essence. And again, it is a dialect that Jung's having with Philemon, who claims to be the knowledge of the things in themselves, in which Jung is gaining his intelligence. And we remember earlier the notion of destroying the dialect by not allowing things to be themselves. It all aligns with this true notion that has been lost of logic and reason. And it may be due to our own ego's inflations or soullessness in society. Now back to this discussion with Philemon and Jung after the sermon, as Jung seems still confused by this teaching. He asks one final time, "My father, is that your guarantee that you are not mistaken?" Philemon concludes the entry, "There are no mistakes in these things. There are only different levels of knowledge. These things are as you know them. Only in your world are things always other than you know them, and therefore there are only mistakes in your world." After these words, Philemon bent and touched the earth with his hands and disappeared. And we see Philemon's words here before he disappears on those levels of knowledge and how they can be an allegory to those levels that Socrates just spoke of. And as we climb towards knowing from image thinking, we may strive towards reality in its truest form, without mistake. And with that, Philemon disappears, and the first sermon has concluded. In the next sermon, the dead return with the question, "Where is God? Is God dead?" In which Jung's response and commentary will follow. I thank you for all the continued support for this channel, and if you would like to give back, please continue liking and sharing this material. Until next time, stay humble.